What's up, guys? Today we have a very important discussion to talk about determining what bike I get next, whether it be the Altis Sigma or the E-Ride Pro SR. So I've kind of laid out a lot of side-by-side things that we can see from what info's out there to this point. And we're going to kind of go through that side by side. This is just info that I can find on the internet to this point. Some of this stuff has been changing around. We're going to be looking at a comparison between the two bikes, what we have that is the same or similar, and what we have that is different or differences. And we're also going to be looking at some questions that are maybe unanswered to this point. And if you guys have some other questions, let's see them in the comments below. If you guys have answers to the questions, let's see them in the comments below. And then we're also going to look at some pros and cons. Now, some of this stuff is just from my personal standpoint and where I see it. This could vary for you or someone else, but I'm just kind of doing it to where I stand because I am looking at purchasing one of these bikes, and it's a pretty big purchase for us. If you didn't see the previous video where I kind of talked about why I want to get this bike and talking about what bike you think I should get, check that video out as well. So I put together a little board here that I kind of tried to lay everything out. Now it's a little old school with the whiteboards, but we're just kind of going to go through what we have here. Now, if you don't know some of my background, I do just build electric bikes typically, and I love the electric bike scene. We just sold a handful of our gas bikes actually to go ahead and purchase one of these options. All right, so off the bat, we have the wheelbase. Now the wheelbase on the Altis is saying right around 51 inches. And on the Pro SR is 49.5 inches. So the Altis is really only just a few inches longer, really only 1.5 inches. Some of these numbers I'm seeing vary, so it's hard to say exactly what's right and wrong right now, but this is what we could find as the most consistent numbers we went with. So right behind that, the seat height is about 32 5/8. I'm seeing some places saying between 33.5 inches on the SR, but for the most part, I'm seeing that they're both right around the same, right around that 32.5 to 33 inches seat height, which I think is pretty typical seat height that we're seeing for a lot of those bikes. Now the rear wheel, as you guys probably know, with the Altis, we actually get a pick between a 16 rear wheel and the 19 rear wheel, where on the E-Ride we have an 18 rear wheel, just no choice at all. It's an 18 rear, and they both have a 19 up front. And now along with that, they both have some pretty meaty tires. Now if you pick the 16, it looks like it's a little bit more meaty than the 19 for the Altis. Another bike I want to bring up to this point is the E-Ride 3.0. Now they dropped this bike, and it's actually a really impressive upgrade of the 2.0. The Pro 3.0 also has different tires. It's kind of a mid-ground tire that's good for street and dirt. It has some good tread on it, but it also looks like it's good for on the street. We see a lot of people running like the Shinkos now, so that's actually a pretty cool option to see. So of course we see the video of those two bikes compared as well. There's not a whole lot out on the E-Rides yet, but we're excited to see more. All right, so looking at the weight, we know that the Altis is heavier. Now they're claiming it's 194 pounds. We've actually seen a video where someone weighed the pre-production model and they were looking more around 200 pounds. So we'll see. So like Charged Cycle Works has kind of stated that once you're getting a lot of these bigger platform bikes, we're going to start seeing the weight going up as we're getting bigger motors, bigger batteries, bigger everything. So they are getting a little bit heavier on the heavy side, but I think the power is going to equal out. Where we have the E-Ride Pro SR coming in at 183 pounds on their website. So I don't think we've seen anyone actually weigh this bike yet, so we'll see what that turns out to be. Now the E-Ride Pro 3.0 is going to be 167 pounds on the website, and that's a considerably good amount lower. Now I think the MX-5 is maybe closer to 150 to 160 pounds. So these bikes are getting a little bit heavier, but they are giving us a lot more. So on the forks, I'm seeing, I think they're pretty much just the same kind of adjustable spring typed forks that we've seen like on the MX-5 or similar bikes to that. So a good fork out of the box, nothing great, but I think they should hold up pretty well. Now the ground clearance is another one I've seen a few different numbers on, but I think we're right around 11.25 for the SR, and we're seeing just a little bit higher with 11.75 for the Altis. Now it's not a huge difference, so right around that 11 and over mark, depending on the rear tire, I'm sure. So I'm not sure on the Altis. I would think having a different size tire would drop or raise that just a little bit. All right, so now we get to some important ones like the battery watt hours. Now battery watt hours, I'm just gonna leave it at that instead of mentioning the AH, which we all kind of know. When we start seeing the voltages differ in the batteries, that's where the watt hours don't really add up the same when we're seeing the numbers. So we wanna look at the watt hours, which is of course taking our AH and multiplying it by our volts, and we get our simply watt hours out of that, and that's where we're gonna be able to compare these two. For the Altis, we're gonna see 3,402 watt hours, where on the E-Ride Pro SR and the 3.0, we're seeing a 3,600 watt hours. So a few hundred watt hours different. So to kind of compare that, if it was both like a 72 volt battery, it would be maybe like 2 AH smaller than the SR if we were to just try to simply compare that. So not a huge difference there. And also we'll bring it up later, but the hairpin motor is supposed to be more efficient with power, giving us larger battery range as well. So we'll touch base on that in a little bit. Now, of course, like we mentioned, the voltages are different. With the Altis is claiming now that it is a 97.2 volts to be truly accurate of what they have on their website. The Pro SR is of course a 72 volt. Now this brings up a question. When we have higher volts and we're seeing those higher wattages, we're gonna need more amps to get us higher watts. Again, now our volts times our amps gives us our watts. So when we have a lower voltage, we're gonna need more amps to get those higher wattages. Now, generally that can create more heat. So with the 97.2 volt, I would assume that we're using less battery amps coming out of the battery to achieve those higher wattages into the 20 kilowatt zone, where out of the 72 volt, we're gonna need a much higher amperage dumped out of that battery to basically achieve those high kilowatts above the 20,000s for the peak. So again, that's something to think about when we talk about battery range. I think that we might see that equal back out. Although the E-Ride Pro has a 50 AH and we see the 35 AH on the Altis Sigma, again, that's only going to really compare to a 2 AH difference when you actually compare those numbers into watt hours. So just kind of look at it that way, because I know this is kind of changing things up to what we've been taught in the past, since everything's kind of been a standard. And now the Altis Sigma has 5 regen options, so I'm kind of curious to see what those are. Where the E-Ride Pro, I'm not sure. That's another question, is do we have different modes like we did on the 2.0 and like the 3.0 does have? The SR now has a finger throttle, which actually looks really cool. I love using that. It saves you brake pads. It saves you, you know, you can roll when you want to roll, and then you can slow down with your motor when you want to slow down and kind of save on your brakes. But I'd like to see still options as well with that. So hopefully they still have some options that you can leave in there. And that is kind of a bummer on the Altis, is that we're not really seeing any thumb throttle like we see on the MX or some of our DIY builds or upgrade kits for Surons and Talarias. This has become a lot more of a common thing, as it's one of those things that we want to utilize when we come into the electric. The 3.0, I believe, is just a 3-mode option like the 2.0 was. Now when it comes to brakes, we are seeing that they both have a more DOT 4 moto style brake that's a little bit higher grade than our mountain bike brake that we've seen on these in the past. This is going to be a great upgrade. Now the difference we're going to see is that the front rotor on the Altis is a 280 millimeter rotor, where on the SR it is a 220 millimeter rotor all around. The Altis has a 220 in the rear as well. So that's again more of a dirt bike style thing. We usually see a larger rotor and more stopping power on the front of our bike rather than the rear. Brakes look similar, and like Charged Cycle Works has also stated that a lot of this stuff is probably coming out of the same factories. So I think it's a lot of the same style brakes that we're seeing on these more higher grade E-Motos, where they're kind of higher powered. We need better stopping power. So I think it's kind of becoming the more normal and regular when we're looking at this kind of upper E-Moto, mid-grade class, we'll call it. So when talking about motors, we of course did mention that the Altis Sigma has the new hairpin motor that we haven't really seen in the E-Moto game yet, or the e-bike game in general. So I've kind of went ahead and just educated a little bit of myself. I'm not super educated, but we're going to kind of try to tell you guys what I've come up with. So we're calling it the hairpin motor. Now we see in the Altis Sigma, it's an IPM motor, which is an embedded magnet motor, meaning the magnets are embedded in the motor versus like a My 1020 motor where the magnets are on the outside of the motor and just held on with a little band. So when we look at the hairpin, it's actually an IPM rotor inside, and the stator is what's different on the outside that actually has different copper windings on it. So when we refer to the hairpin, it's actually a square or more rectangle little copper winding that they're using and able to kind of do these motors differently. So although it's claimed as a new hairpin motor in the E-Moto industry like it was to me, this has actually been used in a handful of vehicles. Like we know they've mentioned Tesla, but it's actually been in the Prius, the Chevy Volt, GM has used it, BMW, Volkswagen, Porsche, and some others that I'm probably forgetting off the top of my head. So these are some other good companies that obviously are using this motor because it's just more beneficial. This might be a good step moving forward that they've taken the initiative to go ahead and bring this into the game. A hairpin motor could be 25% less cost if you're invested into these different machines that are a little bit more expensive than your traditional windings that I guess are a little bit more simple. This is where it's more of an investment, and Altis Sigma is obviously taking that step forward, which I think is probably a good thing. We also see that they claim 20 to 30% more power out of the motor than the same motor. And as well as that, we also see that they say 20% more efficiency than the same motor rather than not a hairpin motor. And part of that is going to be because we're going to see some less copper loss, which essentially means as power travels, we lose some power as it moves through the copper windings and wires. So this is cool to see that we're losing less of that power and we're keeping more efficiency to keep us moving farther and probably actually getting us more range out of this using this motor than if we had just a regular IPM. So some of the last benefits I can see is that it's actually going to be longer lasting because there's less components in there. It actually has less heat because those copper windings are actually just kind of, I guess, set more specific and have more space to let heat go through and work out better in that sense, as well as less noise because it's just a quieter, smoother operating motor, I guess. So we'll find out as they start to come in and see what people think who have multiple bikes in the garage. I'm sure the Teleria boys will give us a good demonstration of it, as well as some other guys out there. All right, I'm sorry for the new boring education. We'll get back to it. The new hairpin motor, now they're claiming, is going to be 22 kilowatts from the Altis Sigma at their peaks. Something I'd like to know is where it's going to sit at for its continuous. I know that the E-Ride Pro mentions 10 kilowatts, so I'm assuming that's going to be their continuous. Now the E-Ride Pro SR for its peak is going to be a whopping 25 kilowatts, which is absolutely insane for the price range that they put this bike in. Obviously, it's E-Ride's way to say you. Now, because they have more kilowatts, does that mean it's the better bike? I don't know. It's hard to say, and it probably depends on exactly what you want. Now, the E-Ride Pro 3.0, I think, is going to be around a 6,000 continuous, they're saying, and a 15.2 kilowatt peak, which is also pretty impressive. That's a good amount of power. When we look at our motor torque, we're going to see that the Altis Sigma just has a hair more, coming in at 72 newton meters of torque, where the SR has 70 newton meters of torque. But the wheel torque, E-Ride is taking the win with the SR having 630 newton meters of wheel torque. And with the Altis Sigma, we're seeing the MX with the 16-inch rear wheel coming at 601 newton meters of torque, and the standard being at 533 newton meters of torque. So the E-Ride Pro does stand its ground pretty good everywhere. So both these bikes, from what I can see, they're having a 1-year warranty as far as the battery, the motor, and the controller goes, which is of course the important parts. Obviously your normal wear and tear, they're not gonna warranty anything on, that's on you. But if there is specific issues, they say that they are gonna take care of it for up to 1 year. The E-Ride says 1 year or up to 2,000 miles, whatever comes first. Another thing to note is if you do any modifications or anything whatsoever to the bike from how it comes out of the box, besides changing like your tires or your brake pads, you're pretty much going to be wiped out of that warranty. So that's another reason that I have just wanted something that out of the box is going to be worthy of just opening up, turning the key, and using and being happy with, and not wanting upgrade and wanting more. Like I know some of the previous models in the past few years, I just would not have been happy with. So when we're looking at our charge times, the Altis Sigma is saying from 20 to 100% is going to take 3 hours, which is pretty impressive. Where the E-Ride SR, they're saying from 20 to 90% is going to be 3.5 hours. So we're seeing the Altis Sigma charging a good amount faster. If you're someone who's going to be running the track and plans on charging it while you're eating a sandwich and taking a break, that might be beneficial to you. If you're someone who's just going to ride it throughout the day and, you know, put it in the garage and charge it back up and save it for the next time you ride, not a huge deal. They're both incredibly fast charge times. Now, the displays is something that I think is going to be mixed opinions on. I personally like a big display. I like to have my info up. I like to have settings to go through on board without having to get my phone out. I think that's awesome. We're seeing the 3.5-inch display on the Altis. It's not clear on the E-Ride. If you guys have one, let me know what it is. But I see a little more information on the Altis, I think, than the E-Ride is showing, just showing like its live amps. I kind of like to see that stuff just because I'm a nerd. Now I know it is kind of out in the ordinary to have a fancy screen on our dirt bike, so I can see both sides of it for sure. Now again, when we're talking about the controller amp output, like I touched base on before, we see that they're saying the Altis is a 450 phase amp controller. I would assume they're pulling somewhere around 200 line amps to get that 22 kilowatts out of the 97 volt battery when it's full. Another thing I'd question is, does that remain giving us the same top speed until it's like almost dead? Like we've seen the Teleria boys show the difference on batteries that the E-Rides sometimes wear down and have the most top speed when it's full. And as you start to get running through the track and get to 50%, you're not getting that same full power when you're at 100, where like some bikes like Teleria's seem to have that power all the way through. I think even an Ultra B kind of is like that as well. So that's a question that I have. We can also, I can't find anything really on the SR to know what its phase amps or line amps are. I can only assume that they're pulling 300 line amps out of that battery for their peak to get that 25 kilowatts with the 72 volt battery. That's a lot of amperage. That's going to create a lot of heat. It's just a lot to dump out of that battery. So again, that to me is kind of an advantage when we look at the Altis having a higher volt battery. In the DIY scene, I was always taught from the perspective of you want to have higher volts, just because higher volts is going to give you more power and more punch without taking more amps, which is going to give you more heat and more issues and more, just you're taking more power essentially. So I think that's a good thing that they weighed that out with when we see that, along with the hairpin motor to kind of equal out some of the efficiency on that. So I'm actually really excited to see how these two bikes compare. So some of the things like I mentioned already and some more that are going to be the same or very similar on these bikes is the seat height, the front wheel, that's a 19-inch wheel, the DOT4 more in between moto and mountain bike style brakes. As well as having reverse. Now we see on the E-Ride, they have added reverse to the turbo switch, and on the Altis, they added a reverse switch on the back. So, and the DIY scene, I actually added reverse to a bike and would have never thought it would come in as handy as it has. Something that I now really kind of just feel like we need to see. Why not have reverse with a click of a switch? It looks like these batteries are both coming from Greenway, which is the highly trusted pack when it comes to any of these Teleria Surons, E-Ride. I think all of these are using the Greenway packs for the most part, and that's who we want to see making these batteries, and they're using the Samsung 50S cells. So pretty good stuff there. Also, like I said, the higher voltage I think is going to be easier on those cells than the lower voltage dumping higher amps. So something to think about there. The rims and tires here are both more of an upgraded E-Moto style tire, where before we were looking at more of like a mountain bike style hub. They've upgraded these hubs and a lot of this stuff to just kind of make it more beefy and I think track ready. Now both these bikes, the max load they're saying is 300 pounds for the rider, and they're claiming 70 miles per hour for their top speeds. Now, we'll see what happens, I think, for those top speeds. I'm curious if we'll see that 70 miles per hour or not. We can see some different sprocket setups going on when we look at the rear sprocket on both of these bikes. So it's kind of interesting how that's going to play out, as well as we know the E-Ride has upgraded their belt drive and their belt pulleys and everything. So the Altis Sigma actually does have a gearbox. Now there's debate on if there's going to be a oil change. We've heard that there's going to be a 5-year oil change. Thank you to who brought that up in the comments. So to me, yes, I am trying to ditch maintenance from e-bikes, so that is kind of a drag. 5 years is also like not that big of a deal, I guess, if it is that. So I don't know, I guess we'll see how that is. I know Talaria's, that was one thing that I thought was a drawback, but also with this much wattage, I am a little weary of a belt running over 20,000 watts. It's a lot of power. If the wheel lifts up and then you're holding throttle and sets down, I just feel like you're gonna snap it. So maybe not, we'll see. People will let us know, I'm sure, right away. I like the gearbox better initially, but I don't like that I have to change the oil. I'm selling my gas dirt bike because I'm sick of changing the oil. And then they both have a tunable controller, which I am loving to see tunable controllers out of the box. This is huge. Why would we not have tunability if we're getting into electric? That's one of the beauties I tell everyone is, you want to have your throttle feel like this or that, you should have it at the touch of your fingertips with an app. So I hope we're seeing that kind of tunability. I haven't seen much on the app for either yet. I'd love to see all the settings we really have to play with on these bikes, and I want to see how much live data we're able to see and how much we're able to kind of change some of those aspects, if we're able to change the settings and the modes to have different feelings for different modes or what. So hopefully the reviews will kind of answer some of this up. So I think that the E-Ride Pro has an app, but the Altis Sigma, everything is through the little switch that we see on the bars there. That is kind of interesting. I would like to have an app and be able to do it through that. And it also brings up the question, how much are we going to get to play with the settings and stuff? Are we going to get to see as much as we'd like to with the actual settings to go through, or is it just basic settings we get to turn on and off, like brake sensor switches and stuff? And so a handful of questions I have for like the Altis is going to be, is there a foot brake? How do the modes work for regen? Is it on the switch, or you got to go in the settings, or what? Is it fast and easy to change or not? How do the key cards work? Do I need to have this key card on me all the time, or can I swipe it, put it in good mode that I want, and leave the key card in my drawer in the house until like my nephews or nieces come over and I want to let them ride it once they're old enough and we turn it down and something. So I'd like to know some more on that. I'm assuming it's waterproof because they all are, but can I just hose this thing down with a power washer like we are with all the other E-Motos now? On the SR, some questions I have is there regen modes besides the finger switch or the thumb switch? Again, the amps, what are we doing for line amps and phase amps coming from that controller? I'm very curious with the setup and the voltage of that battery, how many amps they're dumping out of it. And of course, for both of them, we're starting to wonder, what is the real range going to be? Because I'm not even going to mention what everyone's claiming, so we will find out. Again, I'm sure Talaria boys will be on that one. And like I said, is it going to be the top speed is the top speed when it's totally charged full? Or is it going to kind of hold that ground and have that remaining power drop once you hit like certain percentage? I know like an Ultra B, I think, is between 10 and 15%. People say dramatically cuts and they have no power, and it's basically get her home mode if you're lucky. You of course never want to get these bikes below 20, but some guys just test it for us to see. But that's what we want to see. I want to know, is that thing going to give me full power all the way through until I'm about dead or not? So we did reach out to both of the companies. It's been like about a week, and so far E-Ride just got back to me. They said that the person with the answer to my questions is actually sick right now, and they'll get back to me, so we'll do a follow-up video on this. Altis Sigma, we have yet to hear back from you guys, so it does make me a little weary of, I'm about to hand over, you know, $5,500 to them, so I would have loved to hear back, just a few basic questions to get answered, but hopefully we'll get those answered soon. Some of my personal pros and cons. Now on the Altis, I'm going to say the cons is that it's heavy. It's less watts than the E-Ride Pro, although it's still an amazing amount of watts for the money. And it's new. Everyone's really speculative on it being new, it being a new hairpin motor, which I do want to mention with the hairpin motors. If they don't have them dialed in or anything's a hair off, I think that there's going to be issues from what I'm seeing on the hairpin motors, how they kind of read. So hopefully they have everything really dialed in with these hairpin motors. With the 1-year warranty, makes me not as worried. I think it's something that you're not going to see an issue later. If there's some sort of issue, you're going to know it right away. You're going to be dealing with them and they'll probably get you taken care of. And once they get through a few bugs, I'm sure it's probably going to be fine. Or maybe they've already worked it through, because I know they've been doing their beta testing and let the prototypes out. So I think that's great. Some of the pros on the Altis, I think, is the looks. I personally think it looks amazing. I know people who think it looks terrible. I couldn't understand it. I love it. I'm kind of sold on the looks, to be honest. I think it's amazing with what it's putting out. On paper, I think the SR is better, but I do like the Altis more. I am kind of leaning that way right now. It does have a working brake light. I think the tail end of it all looks good. I like the working brake light. Another pro for the Altis is that you can pick a 16 rear wheel or a 19 rear wheel. I think that's a great option. Some people are getting the 19 out of the box, and we want to put the 16 on right away if we're using more dirt or off-roading on the bike. I think it's great, but that's good to just give us the option right away. So absolutely love them for that. Now looking at the SR, some of the cons I think is the looks. I don't think it looks bad. I just think the Altis looks better in my personal opinion. It's a 72 volt, which, like I said, I think it's taking more amps. I do think that's a downfall. Once you're running that many amps, I think they should just crank a few more volts out of it. And like I kind of stated, the 18-inch rear, you're kind of just stuck at that 18-inch rear. It's not really a bad thing. No matter what, that bike's gonna ride great, but I think it's just cool that Altis gave us the option. The SR Pros is, of course, like we said, the power. I think this thing is gonna be a powerhouse. On paper, it shows faster, better, more torque, and should just be an absolute beast. So we'll see if it's gonna hold up to all of that side by side when someone starts comparing it. They have the kill switch for the lights. You can kill all the lights and just kind of turn your tail light and headlight off. If it's daytime and you're riding the track, you don't really need that on anyway. And also, everyone rants and raves about their headlight. It is absolutely phenomenal out of the box. Don't know why everyone doesn't give us that good of a headlight, but good for them. I think a lot of their goal is just giving us stuff out of the box that is good. Like their foot pegs look great on the bike. So another pro is that they're well known at this point. A lot of people have a lot of trust in them. I know they're based out of California. And the regen finger brake, I think, is a good pro on the SR. You know, it's a pretty cool feature. Like I say, I've learned to use it more on my DIY stuff. I know a lot of other things have integrated it into their controllers. All right, so finally we talk about the price, right? And now on the website, you know, it says free shipping, this, that, but with taxes and with the shipping crate and different stuff, from what I've seen, I'm seeing the Altis right around $6,150 and the SR being right around $100 more at $6,260. They're right around the same price, putting themselves right in that Ultra B price range, which I don't know. The Ultra B is a great bike. I see great things about it, but we'll see what everyone thinks as these bikes come out to put them up against it for that price range. I think they're going to be pretty ultimate. So guys, of course, I want to hear, what do you guys think of these two bikes? What are you, or would you spend your $62 to $300 on? And only time will tell what these two bikes are going to be capable of, as we see some of these YouTube influencers put them up head to head against each other, which we're of course grateful for. I'm going to wait and see what some of these people say once they get them in. They should start rolling in within the next month or two, and I assume we'll start seeing videos. So this is just kind of a little pre-look, and if you guys want to kind of line them up side to side, this is what we've done for you guys to look at it, and I appreciate y'all for hanging out. Peace.